We'll start tonight the 8th parak, the last parak of Masechet Yoma. It's a challenging parak. Now we'll see if we can finish it. Yoma Kippurim, Asur Achila Ubishasiya. The word Asur here could mean a number of different things. It's possible that Asur means Da'oraisa. It could mean D'Rabbanan. But the premise we're going to work with is that with regard to the Isra Achila and Shasiya on Yom Kippurim, there's no doubt that that is an Isur D'Oraisa derived from the Pasuk V'nisem es nafsho seichem, the requirement of afflicting oneself and certainly abstaining from Achila and Shasiya. Now that means that when the Torah says, V'nefesh asher lo se'una, if a person indulges in Achila and Shasiya and he's not in a state of Inui, V'nichrasa, the Torah says the chiyuv, the obligation here, the punishment here is kares. So that if the word asur here means kares, then that applies to Achila and Shasiya. But let's look at the other part of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah continues, Berachita b'sicha b'nilas asando b'tashvish hamita. These are 4 categories of inui, which are not included in the pshat in the pasuk of V'nisem. These are categories which the Rabbanan added, which would mean, therefore, that the word asur here would indicate an Isur D'Rabbanan. Or perhaps we have to split the Mishnah into 2. When it comes to Achil and Shasiya, the word asur means min Torah. When it comes to the balance of the 4 Inuyim, it might mean asur min Rabbanan. Alternatively, even the 4 Inuyim, which were instituted by the Chachamim, even they come under an Isur D'Oraisa, and the Rabbanan are simply expanding our definition of Inui. Included in Inui, according to the Rabbanan, it's Rechita and Ilsasando and Tashmish Hamita and Sicha. These are categories which the Rabbanan included under Inui. And therefore, if someone were to violate any of these 4 categories, he would be in violation of a Doraisa. And the Ran here at the beginning of this parak asks the question, where do we find such a thing? Is there a precedent for a rabbinic enactment which now expands a Doraisa and gives it the status of a Torah law? And indeed, we find such things. There are precedents. The Torah says, with regard to Chol HaMoed, Mikra Kodesh, and there are many malachas which the Rabbanan prohibited on Chol HaMoed, and they come on the Mikra Kodesh, which is a Doraisa. We also find, for example, with regard to V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, that the Rabbanan defined many, many different categories that are included under this mitzvah, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. But if a person fulfills Bikur Cholim, Anicham Avelim, etc., he has in his hand a kiyum of a mitzvah doraisa, which means that the Torah gives authority to the Rabbanan sometimes to define the doraisa. And this is a very excellent example, that these 4 inuyim, although they are defined by the Rabbanan, and they are set up as categories, enacted by the Chacham with many details and nuances of differences and halachas, nevertheless, they're all part of Ini Doraisa. However, when the Torah says V'nisem, it means primarily Achila and Shasiya. That for sure is not only Doraisa, but moreover comes under Chiv Kares. The other 4 Inuyim, although they may be Doraisa, we're not sure, if they are Doraisa, they do not engender a Chiv Kares. The Mishnah continues, Amelech ve'hakala yirchetzu es pneihem. Now Rashi tells us that Melech Darko Ushvacho Lios Noah, Shenemar Melech Biyofio Techazer Einecha. A Melech has to be presentable, and therefore we're going to allow the Melech, according to the Tanakama of our Mishnah, Rechitza on Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippurim is also for everyone, but not for the Melech. And that's because he has to be Noah. His appearance has to be very presentable. We go on to the case of Kala. And Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah says that a Kala is permitted to bathe on Yom Kippur. Rashi says, Kala tzricha noi, she too, like the Melech, has to appear in a beautiful way. And how long is she a Kala? And I'd like to think my wife is a Kala. Okay, we've been married 43 years, but she's still a Kala. No, says Rashi, Kol Shloshim Yom L'chu Pasi Kriya Kala. The first 30 days after the chuppah, she is considered a Kala, and Rabbi Eliezer allows a Kala Rechitza on Yom Kippur. Hachaya Tidol es hasandal. Rashi says, Chaya is a yoledes. And the halacha treats with a great deal of sensitivity a woman after birth. Her status is almost equivalent to a chola sheyesh bo sakana. She's weak, her immune system is down, and tinoles hasandal, Rashi says, shaha sina kashala. If she gets cold by walking on the cold floor, that could be very dangerous for yoledes after birth. Here, for some reason, Rashi doesn't tell us how long after birth does she retain that status of a yoledes, of a chaya. But one thing is clear, that the Mishnah is, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is bending over backwards with leniency in terms of the observance of Yom Kippur for the sake of, number one, a Melech, number two, a Kala, and number three, a Chaya. The Chachamim omrim, the Chacham osri. Chachamim never accepted that kula. Now here we have a number of issues that come up in the Rishonim. First, can we prove from Rabbi Eliezer that Shar Inuyim, meaning the four categories of Inuy, which, as we said before, were established by the Rabbanan, as opposed to Achil and Shasia, which are Inuyim Doraisa and come under the Chiyuv Kares. These four, we'll call them Shar Inuyim, are D'Rabbanan. Says the Ran, there's no proof. Even though you find kulos, leniencies in these three cases, that doesn't prove that they're D'Rabbanan. Even if I grant you that they are Doraisa, but since the Torah used that vague, ambiguous term Inui and authorized the Chachamim to define exactly what is considered Inui, the Rabbanan are also given the authority to define the limitations of Inui. When does Inui as an Iser apply? When does it not apply? And once again, we go back to that paradigmic case of Malach and Chol HaMoed, and the Rabbanan will tell you when you're allowed to do Malach and Chol HaMoed and when you're not allowed to do Chol HaMoed. Even if I hold that Malach and Chol HaMoed is Doraisa, the opinion of many Rishonim, but nevertheless the Rabbanan are authorized to define the scope of the Iser D'Rabbanan. So therefore they were Matir a Dover Ovid and a Dover L'Tzoch HaMoed, etc., Tzochay Rabim. Those are the categories which define the scope and the application of those Isurim D'Oraisa of Chol HaMoed, and who defines that scope? It's the Rabbanan, who were authorized by the Torah, because the Torah said it, as we said before, in an ambiguous way, to define the nature of that Isur. The same exact approach, says the Ran, applies in the case of V'nitzem es nafsho seichem. The Torah is throwing the ball. I don't know if it's a soccer ball, that I can't promise you, Brian, but throwing the ball into the court of the Rabbanan. They will define when the Isur Inui applies and when it does not apply. Now, another question that comes up is, how do we paskin? And it seems from the early Rishonim all the way down to the poskim that we have accepted the shita of Rabbi Eliezer. And that means we could be makil and lenient in the case of a kala. Melech is not too common these days, but a kala 30 days after a chuppah, that's common. And in the case of yoledes. We go on in the Mishnah. The Mishnah now addresses the question of achila and shesia. What is the minimum shear, the volume, which would generate an Isur kares as a violation d'oraisa v'nisa? And interesting, normally we talk about nevela, treifa, and machalos hasuros in general. What is the shear? It's always a kizayis. Not so in the case of Inui on Yom Kippur. The Mishnah says, Ha'ochel kikoseves hagasa kamoa ukigarinasa v'ashose malo lugmov chayav. The word chayav here means chayav kares. And here, with regard to achila, we have a substitute shear. Instead of the classic universal shear of kizayis, we have something called kekoseves hagasa, which is translated as a very large date. Now, this is interesting. Number one, which is larger, a kizayis or a koseves hagasa? And number two, why is the shear of achila to incur a chiyuv kares for inui a different shear than the shear of kol hatarkulu, which is a kizayis? So, in answering the first question, we say that a kizayis is actually smaller than a koseves hagasa. And that's why the Mishnah emphasizes gasa, to indicate that we are talking about a large date. And the large date has a greater volume than a kizayis. So Abosai, if I were to ask you the fine question, is achila on Yom Kippur as an Isur, compared to the Isur achila of nevelas, treifas, and chametz on Pesach, etc., is it l'kula or l'chumra? What would you give me as an answer? It's only names. I thought there were people here. Charney? I just want to know before I leave, is there anyone there who could hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, Chaim hears me.
I hear you very clearly.
Oh,
Yeah, not a problem. I hear you.
oh, I'm so. You should know you made my day. I'm so glad. I saw just names on the screen. No one was responding. I didn't know if anyone was there. Again, I'm asking you, if a
Yeah,
Koseves Hagasa is larger than a Kizayis, is that a Kula or a Chumrah?
that I don't know. I gotta think.
Well, let me ask you a question. Somebody Nebuch ate on Yom Kippur, whether he did it deliberately or mistakenly, he forgot it was Yom Kippur, I don't know what. If he ate a Kizayis, is he Chayav?
Yes.
No, he's not Chayav. He has to eat a Koseves Hagasa.
Uh-huh.
This is the part of the shir you didn't hear because you were only a name on the screen. But now that you're a person, although I only see a name here, it's severe.
There.
Oh, good. The trouble is, Alan, you must be very tired because you're drinking milkshakes. You know, milk at night makes a person very tired. I'm just joking with you. I'm only trying to ask you the following question. Koseves Hagasa, which is the minimum amount of achila to incur a chiyuv kares to violate Yom Kippur, is larger than a kizayis. So if you only ate a smaller volume, which is called an olive size volume, you're not chayav for Yom Kippur. You're only chayav on Yom Kippur if you eat a larger size of a koseves, a large date. Is that a kula in Yom Kippur or is it a chumrah in Yom Kippur? If I tell you you're not chayav, is that a leniency or a stringency?
Kula.
Leniency.
It's a leniency. That's called a kula. So we have a gavaldiga kula here in Yom Kippur that even if I ate something, which normally, if it's nevela, a treifa, chametz b'pesach, orla, kalaya kerem, etc., I would incur a chiyuv. Here, I'm not chayav. Why? Because the Mishnah says I'm not chayav until I eat a koseves hagasa. Why not? Why is the shear? Why are we being so lenient with regard to Yom Kippur, saying no, the kizayis is not a violation? And here, Abos, I want you to listen very carefully if you can. The Iser of Achila on Yom Kippur is different than every other Achila in the Torah. Every Achila in the Torah requires what we call a Maisa Achila, and that's the beginning, that's the end. From A to Z, it begins and ends with the Maisa Achila. Achila is Bekazayis. Less than a Kazayis does not qualify, constitute an Achila. In the Torah's legal definition, more than a Kazayis is an Achila. But on Yom Kippur, the Iser is not Achila. Achila is a way of undermining the state of Inui. And the Torah commands me on Yom Kippur to be in a state of Inui, Inui with an ayin, right? Affliction. Unless I eat a significant amount and it goes into my system, into my belly, I have not undermined Inui. I can still be in a state of Inui because I ate a very small amount, even though Kazayas is enough for an Achila, but it doesn't break up the Inui. When do I undermine the Inui state? When do I feel a sense of, it's beginning to feel like I ate something of significance, I'm satiated? When I eat a koseves hagas. Then we get to Shasiyah. With regard to drinking, the Mishnah says, Milo lugma. Milo lugma means that it would fill my cheeks on both sides. Normally, we say that in Kol HaTorah Kula, Shasiyah is defined by a revius halug. Right? We always say to a person, well, did you drink a revius? You've heard that. A revius is much smaller of a volume than Melo Lugma. Because once again, the Shasiyah is a vehicle to undermine and negate Inui. At what point do I negate Inui? Because I had a revius? Did you ever see they have the Kiddush cup of the Chafetz Chaim? You know how small it is? It's like a schnapps glass almost. For those who like schnapps. I don't know. I can't judge your response. It's just impossible. All right, at least Alan. 1 out of whatever number we have over here, I'm so happy that at least one person is smiling. I can see your smiling face, Alan. A revius is not a large amount of liquid. But on Yom Kippur, you're not chayav until you drink Melo Lugma. Oh, there's Brian. He looks like a king over there. Brian, I'm telling you, you're allowed to wash yourself on Yom Kippur because you're a melech. All right. You see, on Zoom, it's very difficult. Have you ever tried a Zoom and you don't see a single face? Try it once. It's quite challenging.
When are we coming back in person?
Well, I don't know. You tell me if you're on board. I'll try to push myself. In the morning, I'm there for 3 shiurim. Today, I gave a shiur in the afternoon over Zoom. Some very interesting shilas that came up that I wanted to address with regard to Avelim Nebuch who have to go to shul on Friday night, when they're allowed to go, when we do Nicham Avelim. We discussed whether women are chayav in tefillah or not. We had a whole issue about a Jew in Cape Town who owns a college, and he wants to know if he's allowed to keep his college open on Shabbos with students and with lecturers and professors coming in, and he's the privately owned college. So these were some of the issues that we dealt with in the ELC. One of my favorite participants there, that's Jeff Zeifman from Toronto, he says to me, Rabbi, where are you? I don't recognize your library. I said, I have a Jewish library here in Har Nof, but in the LC, they have an amazing English library. And every book behind me was an English book. I have one little shelf here of English books. Most of them actually are from the same author, Emanuel Bernstein. Have you heard of him? Of Emanuel Bernstein?
No, Rabbi.
I'll tell you why you didn't hear of him, because you're South African. He's British. Anyway, so we're on our way back to the AMIC Learning Center. You're always invited, and let me know if you'd like to have the shiur in the AMIC Learning Center. If there's a consensus, then believe me, I'll push myself. But as I say, I'm there for shiurim in the morning, in the afternoon. Tomorrow night, I'm giving a little bit of a shiur. We have a cholent mishmar. You're all invited. I don't know how good the cholent is. I can't tell you, but the shiur will be excellent. I'm just joking. In any event, we go on. What happens on Yom Kippur if Nebuch, a person eats various foods, and each one of those foods is less than a koseves hagasa, but all told, if I integrate all that he ate, it would come up to a koseves hagasa. A man drinks many different beverages, and all told, if you add them up together, it reaches Melo Lugma. The Mishnah says, Kol ha'ochlin mitztarfin l'koseves, v'kol ha'mashkin mitztarfin l'melo lugma. What happens if a man eats and he drinks? The amount that he ate is less than a koseves hagasa. The amount that he drank is less than mole lugma. But together, he's got a massive volume. If we just add both the liquids and the solids, ha'ochlin v'ashosin ein mitztarfin. We don't integrate them before the shiur. What we're saying now is all different ochlim are part of one isa called achila. All different mashkim are part of one isa called shasiya. But achila and shasiya are 2 separate isurim, and they're not mitzvah. So if a man eats half a kazayas of nevela, and he eats half a kazayas of dam, then it's not mitzvah. Almost. Now the Gemara says, asur. What does the word asur mean? So the Gemara says, in the context of the Nisa Vesnafshel Seichem, the Isa Achila Yom Kippurim, asur means anuch karisu. he's chayiv kares. That's what it says in the pasuk. Hanefesh shelo seuna biyom hazeh v'nichrasa mikerev hamel. So the word asur here means a chiyuv kares. Not necessarily so. It could be that the word asur means an isur doraisa, but not a chiyuv kares. How is that possible? And now the Gemara introduces a brand new concept. And what we're about to learn, my friends, without being overly dramatic, is one of the most important sugis in Shas. And that's called Chatzi Shir Asur Min HaTorah. He ate on Yom Kippur less than a koseves. He drank less than Mole Lugmov. That's called Chatzi Shir. And if Chatzi Shir is Asur Min HaTorah, that's what the Mishnah has in mind when it says Ha'ochel V'Shoseh Asur. But he's not Chayiv Kares. So that what we have in every Isur are two different dimensions. It's like if you imagine one of those flow charts, you have the word Isur on top, and then it divides into two. You have an Isur with a Chiyuv and an Isur without a Chiyuv. The Isur with a Chiyuv means he ate or drank a full shear, he's Chayav. In the case of Yom Kippur, it means he's Chayav Kares. On the other side, you have an Isur without a Chiyuv. And if there was a separate plot in the cemetery for Rishayim, we'll bury him amongst the Rishayim. But he's not Chayav. We cannot punish him in a court. And there's no Kares. Why? Because he ate less than a shear. That's what called what? I don't know if you can respond. Less than a shear is called? Okay, Charney got it. Chatzi shear. Charney, yeah. If you're in the mood for murder, no. I have this one thing that just doesn't stop bothering me. I tried very hard to murder, but I was not successful.
Where is he?
I don't know now. Now he's probably floating around. All right. Thank you very much. So the Gemara says, Lo nitzcha el chatzi shir. So he ate half of a koseves agasa. He drank only half of mole lugmov. Hanichol amandi omar chatzi shir asur min haTorah. We have one opinion, which we'll identify as Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that chatzi shir is asur, meaning asur min haTorah. When the Mishnah says asur, it's referring to chatzi shir, less than a full volume, and the word asur means asur min haTorah. We know where to bury this guy after 120, but he's not chayiv kares. He violates a dorais of chatzi shir. Now, if I tell you that there's a dorais of chatzi shir, you have to stand up and yell at me and say, Rabbi Birdsong, where does it say in the Torah chatzi shir? If we're defining v'nisem as koseves agasa, as mole lugmov, in Yiddish we say vushtetas. Where does it say in the Torah that you chai for chatzi shir? And we'll soon see the Gemara takes out a pasuk about chelev, and it says kol chelev lo so chelev. And the extra word kol chelev tells you that even if you eat half of a kazayas of chelev, you violate an Isur Torah. Again, you're not going to be chayv malchus because chatzi shir asur min haTorah cannot generate a punishment because you didn't eat a shear, but nevertheless it's asur min haTorah. We'll soon see that Reish Lakish holds that the requirement of a shear is not just halacha in punishment, it's halacha in the very essential isur. And less than a shear is not asur. The Torah said, don't eat a kezayis, don't eat a kosevas agasa. Less than that, the Torah never prohibited. There's no source in the Torah for chatzi shear. That's Reish Lakish. And if that be the case, then when it says asur in our Mishnah, we have no choice but to assume that he ate a full shear, and asur means that he's chayav kares. But that's very difficult, because whenever the Mishnah wants to tell you all over Shas that for your violation you chayav kares, it doesn't use the word asur. It always employs the word chayav. And that was the original kasha of the Gemara. Let's go back to the beginning of the Gemara. Asur? Anush karesu. The Mishnah shouldn't have said just asur. The Mishnah should have said you're chayav for that. You get kares for that. The use of the term asur implies that there is no chiyuv kares, which makes sense according to Rabbi Yochanan in the case of chatzi shear, because Rabbi Yochanan holds chatzi shear asur min haTorah. There's no chiyuv kares. It's asur, but there's no chiyuv. But what do we do about Reish Lakish? Reish Lakish holds chatzi shear mutar min haTorah. So why does the Mishnah use the word asur? The Mishnah can only be referring to a full shear, and a full shear is chayav for. It shouldn't have said asur. It should have said chayav. The Itmar we learned chatzi shear Rabbi Yochanan Omar asur min haTorah. Reish Lakish Omar mutar min haTorah. Is hanicha Rabbi Yochanan el Reish Lakish ma'ikol meimar. We understand that the word asur here means an isur d'oraisa minus a chiyuv kares, according to Rabbi Yochanan, in a scenario of chatzi shear. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, according to Reish Lakish, who holds that chatzi shear is mutar min haTorah, how do we justify the use of the word asur in the Mishnah? It cannot mean that it's asur without a chiyuv kares because of less than a shear. Anything less than a shear is mutar min haTorah. It's not asur. The Gemara answers, Moder Reish Lakish asur midrabanan. Although Reish Lakish rejects Rabbi Yochanan on a d'oraisa level, and he's refusing to accept that chatzi shear is asur min haTorah, but he does admit that chatzi shear is asur midrabanan. The Rabbanan are not going to give you a half a slice of nevela and say, go ahead and eat half a kezayis of nevela. We don't eat any nevela, not even a half a kezayis, even according to Reish Lakish. Although it's only d'Rabbanan, imagine the Rabbanan would say, if you're going to eat a chatzi shear, have a small cookie. What do you call it? You don't call it a cookie, you call it a biscuit, right? Have a small biscuit of chametz on Pesach. It's only small. Oh, no. Reish Lakish is going to tell you, I admit, I concede that we're dealing with an isur d'Rabbanan. So now we go back to the Mishnah. We ask the question, why does the Mishnah say asur and not chayav? The answer is he ate half a shear, and Reish Lakish is going to learn that asur means asur mirabbanan, glat. Again, if it's nevela, it's not so glat, if you know what I mean. But anyway, we have a smooth understanding of our Mishnah. It's the Gemara, Hachi. I don't know how to interpret a Mishnah in Masechet Shavuos according to Reish Lakish. Now, Rabosa, we become what we call Shas mention. We have to know all of Shas. What's going to open up in front of our eyes is a Mishnah in Shavuos and a Sugin Chulin. I mean, wow. It's all going to open up. Now, in order to appreciate the Mishnah in Shavuos, we have to set down a couple of basic principles. Number one, Ein Shvuah Chal al Shvuah. You cannot take the same Shvuah twice. First time it's valid. Second time, it's meaningless. The ground has already been occupied. You took the first shvua. You can't superimpose a second shvua if the second shvua is identical to the first. Principle number 2. Whatever the Torah prohibits, you and I and every other Jew, ever since that first Chag HaShavuos, when the Torah was given, have accepted with a shvua. We are committed to observe the Torah by virtue of a shvua, of an oath. That's called Mushba V'Omed Mehar Sinai. And if we put A plus B together, that produces C. A person took a shvua that he would not eat nevela. Is the shvua valid? Oh no. Because one shvua cannot be chal on another shvua. You're repeating a shvua that you've already taken back at Har Sinai. But Rabbi, I forgot about that shvua. Doesn't matter. That shvua was a long time ago, but it still is valid. Shvua shalo ochal, says the Mishnah, the ochal nevelas u'treifas u'shkatzim v'ramasim. Says the Tanakama chayav. If he eats nevela and he took a shvua shalo ochal, then he's chayav a karban shvua. Reb Shimon poter. Now Reb Shimon makes a lot of sense, because he cannot take a shvua on nevela. That's not a valid shvua. The Torah already imposed an oath on him not to eat nevela. So what is it? His oath didn't add a thing. And ein shvua chal shvua. But what about the Tanakama? Tanakama says he's chayav for violating shvua. Havina bo, we asked the following question: am I chayav? Mushba v'omed me'ar Sinai. He's already taken the oath at Har Sinai. And now we're at a crossroads. We're going to have a very substantial group of Tanoim, of Amoraim, against Reish Lakish. Amongst the group, we have Rav, we have Shmuel, and we have Rabbi Yochanan. The Amri, they all agree unanimously that Mishnah in Shavuos is talking about a case of Bekolel Dvarim HaMutarim and Dvarim HaSurim. He took an oath not to eat kosher meat, non-kosher meat. And here we have a principle called kolel, not the kolel in the Amic Learning Center. I'm not talking about that kolel. Kolel means when you have an isur that expands and has a greater scope. That's called an isur kolel. Like you would say, kolel akol. The reason why this shvua is valid, according to Rav Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, is because he didn't take a shvua that he will abstain from eating the vela. That would never be valid. Mushba v'yomid v'ar Sinai. But he took a shvua not to eat this and not to eat that, not to eat heter, not to eat iser. We say ain't shvua chalal shvua because the second shvua doesn't add a thing to the first shvua. But what if the second shvua that he takes now adds and expands? Now he's taking a shvua that he won't eat kosher meat in addition to nevela. Once the shvua could be chal, there's space that's unoccupied for the shvua to be chal. With regard to dvarim hamutarim, then the shvua is chal on everything, even on a davras. Reish Lakish never bought into this. Reish Lakish says you cannot validate the shvuah as an oath that commits him to observe that oath just because there are things in that oath that are dvarim mutarim and it's a kol. No. I want to know if his oath is viable with regard to the nevela. With regard to the nevela, he's mushba v'yomi mar Sinai. There's no way the nevela could be included in this in the validity of this oath because nevela is mushba v'yomi mar Sinai. And therefore, Reish Lakish is compelled to come up with a whole new answer to the question of why the Chachamim in the Mishnah in Shvuas Daf Chaf claim that he violates the Shvuah when he eats nevela. How can there be a Shvuah on nevela? Mishnah according to Rav and Shmuel. And Rabbi Yochanan, I understand there could be a Shvuah on nevela because he included in the Shvuah not only nevela, but even a Davar Mutter. And that makes it into a kolel. But Reish Lakish never bought into the concept of Reish Lakish Amar. Iyata motzi ela b'mefaresh chatzi shir. He took a shvuah not to eat half of a kizayis of nevela. There's no mushba v'yomi mar Sinai on half of a kizayis of nevela because Reish Lakish, you remember, is very consistent and he maintains that chatzi shir mutar min haTorah. So when you talk about mushba v'yomi mar Sinai, you cannot include chatzi shir. Pretty clever. I wish I came up with it. Could have got my name written in the Gemara. Now, Rabosai, at this juncture, we have to introduce another machlokes that's very germane between the Chachamim and Rabbi Akiva. And the issue is as follows. A person takes an oath, a shvuah, on his own volition. Nobody forced him to take the shvuah. And therefore, we have to analyze his intention, his mindset. What did he have in mind when he took the shvuah? A man takes a shvuah shelo ochal. I won't eat. What does he have in mind? I won't eat anything, not even the smallest biscuit or crumb. Or did he have in mind, I won't eat a kizayis? I can eat less than a kizayis. He used the word achila when he took the shvuah. So here we have a machlokas between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva has a kind of freelance approach to shvuah, which means laissez-faire. Leave me alone. I took a shvuah that I won't eat. Don't tell me what the Torah considers achila, and I'm not bound by the objective legal definition of achila with the shir of a kizayis that the Torah has instituted. How'd you manage that trick, Alan? Okay, doesn't matter. You were here, now you're there. Okay. You must have snuck behind me. Anyway, so I'm not bound by what I said I won't eat. To me, anything is eating. The Rabbanan say no. If you use the word achila, then we will define and measure achila by the Torah's objective standards. And what you took upon yourself when you said, I will not eat is you will not eat a kazayas. Now Reish Lakish has a very good argument. Reish Lakish is saying that in the Mishnah in Shavuos, a person took an oath, I will not eat, which means I will not eat a kazayas. And therefore, when he says, I will not eat, let's say, nevela, he has taken a shvur that he won't eat a kazayas' worth of an nevela. Everything's beautiful. Mushpa v'yomid v'arsina. He's taken a shvur on an nevela which the Torah prohibited. And in such a case, the shvur is not valid. He's just repeating exactly the shvur that he took at Arsina. So the Gemara says, "Haliba derabbanan b'mefaresh chatzi shir." Instead of saying, "I won't eat nevela," I swear I won't eat nevela. He says, "I swear that I won't eat a half a kazayas' worth of nevela." Says Reish Lakish. Works out beautifully. Now he's taken a shvur on that which is permissible according to the Torah law, because Reish Lakish maintains a chatzi shir mutter min Torah. So therefore, his shvur on a chatzi shir is chal; it's valid. What about Rabbi Akiva? Let's turn to Daf Ayin Dalet. The aliba de Rabbi Akiva, the Omar Odom Oser Atzmo Bekol Shehu. A man has a freedom. He's not bound and committed to the Torah's objective legal definition of achila. He's motivated by his own self-motivation. He decided that he won't eat. When a person says, I won't eat, he means he won't eat at all, even less than a kizah. Now, if that be the case, then it's very good. He's not mushpa v'yomim marsina. Even in case of stam means he didn't specify that my shvua should be chal on a chatzi shir of nevela. He said stam, I won't eat nevela. If he said I won't eat nevela, it means I won't eat any nevela. And that's not mushpa v'yomim marsina, because the Torah, according to Reish Lakish, only prohibits a full shir of a kizayis of nevela. Now we have a problem. What's our problem? We just suggested that Reish Lakish would interpret our Mishnah of Asur as a reference to a chi of kizayis, to a chi of kares, because if it's less than a shir, then it's mutter. So why doesn't the Mishnah say karetz? Why does the Mishnah say asur? We answered, if you recall, because the Mishnah is talking about a case of chatzi shir, which Reish Lakish concedes is asur mirabbanon. So the word asur means the rabbanon, and the rabbanon are not going to allow you to eat a chatzi shir of macholas asuros. If that be the case, we're back to square one with the Mishnah and Shavuos. What about Mushpa v'yomim Sinai? How could the Tanakama, the Mishnah and Shavuos, say that he's chayav for Shavuah when he eats nevela? He's Mushpa v'yomim Sinai. You'll tell me, but it's only D'Rabbanan. So what? The Torah says, Lo tasur mikol asher yorucha. You're not allowed to deviate from anything the Rabbanan teach you. Sees Mushpa v'yomim Sinai. When the Rabbanan said you're not allowed to eat chatzi shir, according to Reish Lakish, that's what we're suggesting, it becomes a shvur that he took in the Torah because it's included in Lo tasur mikol asher yorucha. He's chayav for a shvua because on a biblical level, according to the Doraisa law, he has taken a shvua that he's not mushba v'yomim arsina. No. Once it's asur mirabanan, then it's mushba v'yomim arsina. Why? Because the Torah recognizes an isur d'Rabbanan as if it was an isur Torah. Because the Torah authorized the Rabbanan to make takanos and siagos and institute isurim, and you're not allowed to deviate lo tasur. V'asisa kechal sheyerucha. Even an isur d'Rabbanan is mushba v'yomim arsina. And if that be the case, if Reish Lakish holds that Chatzi Shir is asur mirabanan, then we don't understand the Mishnah in Shvuos according to the Tanakh. Says Reish Lakish, we're talking about a case where he took a Shvua not to eat a shear of Nevel, but a half a shear of Nevel he won't eat. He's mushba v'yomim arsina. How can the Rabbanan say he's chayav for such a Shvua? And the reason he's mushba v'yomim arsina is because Reish Lakish agrees that Chatzi Shir is asur mirabanan. And if you're going to tell me, wait, he's not mushba v'yomim arsina because it's only a drabanan, then in that case, I am going to quote for you another Mishnah in Shvuos. We're now fast forwarding 10 blot from Daf Chaf in Shvuos to Daf Lamed in Shvuos. And once again, we need a little background. There's a very unique parsha in the Torah at the beginning of Sefer Vayikra with regard to what's called the Shvuas HaEdus. And what that means is that if I'm going to the courts to litigate for a litigation, and I claim you owe me 1,000, and you deny it, but I know that these two young gentlemen over here were there, and they witnessed your loan. You borrowed 1,000, but unfortunately, they're not willing to come to court. I know that they have testimony. I know that they're lying when they say, well, we don't know anything. You know, a lot of people, when it comes to testimony, it's like in America, I don't know if you're familiar with this, in your countries, they have what's called jury duty. So you get called in for jury duty to sit on a jury. Right away, all of a sudden, you're the busiest person in the world. You send them all sorts of documents to prove that you can't come to court. People don't like to go to court. They have better things to do at that time. All right, I was once in London, and somebody was willing to take me into a courtroom just to watch what's going on. It was quite an interesting experience for me. I think I mentioned this to you once. You know, I couldn't understand why the judge was wearing a shaitel. But, you know, people don't like to go to court. Who wants to testify in court? And then you get in trouble with the guy, you know, testify against Ruvain and on behalf of Shimon, and Ruvain's going to send the mafia after you. You know, and say, who wants that? Ma'alival etzarazu. How many people witness an accident, an automobile accident? They refuse to come to court. This is what we call in Yiddish machnis wissendig. You know, you make yourself stupid, like you don't know anything. So the Torah gives the tovea, the litigant, in fancy English, it's called the plaintiff, who's suing for damages. They give him the right to call in these witnesses and to be mashbiah them and to impose an oath on them. And I'm mashbiah you that you have edus and you have to come and testify. And if they continue to resist and abstain from testimony, they will violate the shvur. And the Torah describes a situation where the Eidim ultimately did tshuva and what kind of a korban they have to bring for taking that shvuas ha'edus, the shvua that they deny that they have testimony when in fact they did have testimony. So if I ask you, what clout do you have over two people who have testimony for you, but they refuse to testify? The clout that we have in the halachic system is a shvua. No one, even a Jew who's, what should I tell you, he's not on par. No Jew wants to be in violation of a shvua. It's up there in the Decalogue, in the Big Ten. And I, as a litigant, as a plaintiff, have rights to impose the shvua on the Eidim. It's an entire chapter in Masechet Shvuos dedicated to shvuas ha'edus. Now, what happens if the witness or the witnesses that I am being mashbiah, because I'm the plaintiff, are psulei edus, which means they're disqualified for testimony? They're professional gamblers. I'll give you that example. A professional gambler is not trusted in a Jewish court of law. I don't think there's any problem in a secular court of law, but in a Jewish court of law, he's possible. Well, let's say he's related to the malva, to the lova, to one of the litigants. He's possible. By the way, it's interesting. In Jewish law, even a king is possibly edus. We don't accept the testimony of a king. Very fascinating. So now, I was mashbiah someone, and as it turns out, he's possibly edus. That oath is meaningless. Why? Because the Torah says that the purpose of the oath is to facilitate, to allow the plaintiff to get money out of the defendant. He can't get a dime out of the defendant if the Eidim are psulim. They're disqualified. Their edus is worthless, and therefore the shvua is worthless. But then we get to the gray area. Halacha always deals with the gray area. What happens in a case of Masechet Bekubia? Masechet Bekubia, professional gambler, is kosher li edus min haTorah, and he's pasul midrabanan. The Rabbanan said that he is disqualified. We cannot rely on his testimony. Now I'm at a crossroads. I want to be mashbiah these Eidim. On the one hand, in the abstract conceptual world, these Eidim could testify on my behalf. But on the other hand, practically speaking, what we call tachlis, their testimony is meaningless for me because the Rabbanan disqualified them. The Rabbanan will not even allow them to testify because professional gamblers have been disqualified by the rabbis for whatever reason. I mean, the Gemara gives a number of different possible reasons. So we'll finish up now. The Gemara says, "Vasnan shvuas ha'edus einin oheges ela b'ru'uyim lahayit." That the parsha of shvuas ha'edus only applies to Eidim that are qualified to testify. Van Binan Ba, we ask a question of that Mishnah. Lim ute mai. Whom are you excluding? Who is disqualified for Eidim and therefore is outside the parameters of this shvuah? Rav Papa Amar Lemute Melech, because a Melech cannot testify in a Jewish court. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Amar Lamute Masechet Bekubia, because midrabanan he won't be allowed to testify. For Masechet Bekubia, midoraisa mechsei chazi, he's qualified on a doraisa level. V'Rabbanan who depasul, he's only pasul midrabanan. V'lo kachayla alei shvua, and the shvua is not valid. So we have to derive from this the conclusion that once the Rabbanan disqualify, it's as if the Torah disqualified, because the Torah gave the Rabbanan the authority and we have to comply with their authority. So we see that a Drabanan is recognized on a Torah level. And since on a Torah level, we recognize the psul, the disqualification of Masechet Yoma, which was instituted by the Rabbanan, therefore this guy, this testimony, this witness who is now Pasul min Rabbanan because he's Masechet Yoma, he's outside of the pale of the parsha of Hu Eid or Yada or Ra, and Vimlo Yagid Vinos Avono. The Torah says that he's guilty of a terrible crime because the plaintiff was mashbia, not in the case, says Rav Acha bar Yaakov, of a Masechet Yoma. He's out as far as Eidus is concerned. The Shvuah is meaningless. And that's the Chiddush of the Mishnah of Eino Roy Lahayid. Even though on a Doraisa level he's Roy Lahayid, but on a Drabanan level, he's not Roy Lahayid. He doesn't qualify. We won't accept his Eidus. So you see that the Torah considers a Drabanan as if it were Doraisa. And therefore, if a Chatzi Shir, according to Reish Lakish, is also Rabbanan, and he's Mushba B'Yom in Gar Sinai, how can the Rabbanan say that he's Chayev when he took a Shvuah not to eat half of Kezayis of Nevela? It's a shiny Hossam. There's no analogy to the case of Shvuah Sa'edus. The Omakra Im Lo Yagid V'Nosavono. What does Yagid mean? Yagid means that he will tell his story in the courts, and the Dayanim will listen very carefully to his story. Then, if he doesn't give that Haggadah Eidus, then he's Chayev Shvuah's Karman because he took the Shvuah. V'hai, but this Masechet Yoma, who is disqualified by Rabbanon, Lav Bar Haggadah Klal. He could not testify in a court of law, hence he's not included in the Chiyuv Karban Shvuah. So that even though the Torah does not recognize his psul, but tachlis, since he cannot give Eidus on behalf of the litigant because we won't listen to what he has to say, he's not included in Lo Yagid. But with regard to Chatzi Shir, Mushba B'Yom in Mar Sinai, even though Reish Lakish concedes, this is the bottom line of our sugya for today, that Chatzi Shir is awesome in a Torah, is awesome in Rabbanon, but nevertheless, it's not included in the Iser of Mushba V'Yomed Me'ar Sinai. There's no Mushba V'Yomed Me'ar Sinai on that which is Mutar in a Torah like Chatzi Shir and is only awesome in Rabbanon. And with that, I bid you a fine evening, and if I don't speak to you before Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much.